In the primal garden where life began, the first children of humankind cried out amidst the dawn of the world. Adam and Eve. The first human beings did not only give birth to Cain, Abel, and Seth, as the familiar stories tell us. They had many more sons and daughters, children, who grew up in lands untouched by human footprints, in fields still bathed in the first light of creation. Yet, as time passed, these children, these first people, fell into silence. No one remembers their names. No one recounts what they lived, what they loved, what they suffered, or what they dreamed. If Cain and Abel are but the tip of the iceberg, then where is the rest of the story? Who continued those torn-out pages of history? Who buried the memory of Adam and Eve's other children into oblivion, leaving us with only a few solitary names in the Bible? Behind the brief words in Genesis lies a vast tragedy, a tale of wandering division and dreams that never came to be. These children were not merely nameless shadows. They bore the burden of a forming world upon their shoulders, with all the chaos, pain, and hope that early humanity had to endure. They witnessed the first fracture of a family. They walked through unheard-of fears, under a sky where death cast its shadow for the first time. The Bible only mentions that Adam had other sons and daughters after Seth was born. Just a short line, a phrase that passes like the wind. But behind that line were real lives, destinies woven from both light and darkness, from the joy of birth to the tears of parting. They lived, loved, built families, and gave birth to new generations, the earliest branches of humanity's family tree. Yet, like flickering flames in the night, they were extinguished one by one into forgetfulness. Perhaps in the whispers of the winds blowing across ancient plains, their souls still murmur. Perhaps in the very veins that carry blood through our bodies today lingers the breath of those firstborns. Perhaps if we bow in silence to listen to the secrets of the past, we might hear the quiet call of stories never fully told. Today's journey is not merely a search for lost names. It is a journey backward in time through the mist of ancient memory to shine light into a hidden corner of human history. Because the story of Adam and Eve's children is not just history, it is our roots. And perhaps in uncovering their fate, we may come to understand more about ourselves, about what awakened in us our fears, our dreams, and our endless searching from the dawn of time to today. Why among the countless lives of origin does the Bible mention only 3 names? Cain, the one who killed his brother Abel, the first to be murdered, and Seth, the one born to replace. But what about the others? The children who cried under that wild sky, who helped build the first homes, plant the first gardens, walk the first paths. Why did they vanish into silence? That is a question few dare to ask. Could it be that the story is too painful, too complex, too different from the simple image of our beginnings that humanity wants to remember? Could that silence be a veil drawn to hide the ruins, the shame, the first sins rooted too deeply into the heart of the new world? More ancient sources, texts left out of the official Bible, offer faint yet weighty hints. The book of Jubilees, often called the Little Genesis, recounts that Adam and Eve bore not just a few, but dozens, even hundreds of sons and daughters. Each of those early generations lived for hundreds of years, giving rise to new generations, quickly populating the world, which soon grew chaotic and began to decay. The Cave of Treasures. An ancient Syriac text goes even further, mentioning long-lost names, daughters like Avan and Azura, who married their own brothers, for there were no others. These intra-bloodline unions and the children born from them carried the heavy weight of genetic legacy, shaping the entire course of early human history. The question grows louder. How many children did Adam and Eve truly have? How many lives set out from that broken garden into vast grasslands, untouched forests, and nameless shores? And how many carried with them the curse of the first sin, the thirst for freedom mingled with fear, pride entwined with loneliness, to build the earliest civilizations? Perhaps it is in the silence of Scripture that we are being invited into this wordless search, because sometimes the greatest truths are not found in what is told, but in the spaces between the lines, where the soul of man touches the deepest memories of itself. When the gates of Eden closed behind them, Adam and Eve stepped into an entirely different world. No longer did they hear the gentle stream in the sacred garden. No longer did they walk beneath the cool shade where God once strolled. Instead, they faced the first cold winds over barren fields, the dry earth waiting for sweat to bear fruit. They were no longer children of innocence. They were humans, marked by the memory of loss, the pain of separation from their Creator. And in that loneliness, they began to build a new life where every seed sown came at the cost of tears. In that wild world, the first children were born. Cain, the firstborn, his name meaning acquired a declaration of Eve's hope. With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man. Then Abel, a fleeting breath, a fragile life like morning mist. And many other children, those first souls not born into a paradise, but among weeds, stones, and cold midnight rain. This world had no cities, no walls to protect, no law except the vague whisper of conscience and the fading memories of a lost Eden. Adam had to learn to till stubborn soil. Eve had to endure the pain of childbirth, a pain unknown in the garden. Each passing day became a lesson in limitation, in the frailty of flesh, in the unbridgeable distance between mankind and God. Those children grew up in such a harsh world. They saw the invisible scars on their parents, left by the first sin. They heard tales of a garden with no tears, a place now only held in memory. And in that wilderness, the first seeds of both hope and despair took root in the human heart. The story of those forgotten children begins not with triumph, but with failure, not with glory, but with weary footsteps across a vast desert. But in that place where darkness seemed deepest, the first light of a promise, the promise of salvation, began to flicker quietly, preparing for humanity's long journey. In that wild world, two brothers grew up under the shadows of lost promises and fading hopes. Cain the elder worked the barren ground, sweating over crops. Abel the younger wandered the pastures, tending lambs, listening to the wind's song over wild hills. Two paths, two lives, but one origin and one unhealed wound, since Eden closed its gates. one day both brought offerings before the Lord Cain from the fruits of the field, Abel from the firstborn lambs, the choicest of his flock. But God looked with favor upon Abel's offering and not upon Cain's. Not out of favoritism, but because deep within Cain's heart a shadow was forming, one he himself could not yet see. Jealousy, bitterness, and the sting of rejection weighed on Cain like a thick, dark mist. The Lord warned him, "Sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." But Cain did not rule over it. He invited Abel to the field, and in that open place with no one to see, he raised his hand and killed his brother. The first drop of human blood spilled upon the earth. Abel's death did not merely end a life. It opened the door to a chain of blood-stained tragedies, the first crack in the fragile bond of humanity. It was not only the first murder, it was the first death by the hand of another human, a silent betrayal of the image of God in which mankind had been made. The earth, which once received only seeds and tears, now drank human blood, and Abel's cry for justice echoed to the heavens. God asked Cain, "Where is your brother?" And Cain answered with a coldness that history would echo countless times. "Am I my brother's keeper?" From that moment, the world was no longer simple. It was no longer only about soil and sweat. It was now about blood and unforgiven sin. Abel's death marked the beginning of human history, scarred by wounds that never fully heal rivalries, wars, the silent weeping in empty fields, and in that desolation through the howling winds over barren hills, Adam and Eve, the first of us, tasted the sorrow of losing a child, a grief that tore not only at their hearts, but left scars upon the soul of all humanity to this very day. While the pain of Abel's death still throbbed and Cain the murderer vanished from sight, Adam and Eve were left with a void nothing could fill. Eden was gone. One child was dead. Another was a wanderer. What remained but regret and shattered memories of those first days, now forever out of reach. It was in that moment that Seth was born, not merely as a replacement for Abel, but as a quiet symbol of hope that had not been completely extinguished. When Eve named this new child, she said, "God has granted me another child in place of Abel since Cain killed him." In those words were sorrow and a glimmer of hope, like a hidden spring beginning to trickle in the desert. Seth was not merely another child. He was a fragile bridge between what had been lost and what might yet be redeemed. In the book of Jubilees, an ancient text once widely read among the early communities of Israel, Seth is described as the sacred heir through whom the original stream of faithfulness to the Creator would be preserved. In a world rapidly descending into darkness, where the line of Cain plunged ever deeper into violence and depravity, Seth's lineage was seen as a small flickering lamp that still burned in the night. Seth grew up not only with an awareness of God's existence, but also with a deep, unhealed ache, a memory of Eden etched upon his soul. Ancient tradition holds that it was Seth's descendants who maintained the longest communion with the Creator, a small, secluded community that did not follow in the corrupt ways of their brothers, but instead clung steadfastly to the unwritten laws inscribed upon their hearts from the very beginning. From Seth, came Enoch, and in the time of Enoch, Scripture records a peculiar detail. Then men began to call on the name of the Lord. Was it that in a world growing ever colder and more estranged, the pure current of faith was beginning to dry up and needed to be rekindled by a desperate cry from the human heart? Seth did not only carry forward the bloodline of Adam and Eve, he carried something far more sacred, a memory of the once close connection with God, a reminder that even though Eden was lost, God's promise had not faded. And as long as people like Seth stood firm amid a world spinning out of control, there would remain a flicker of hope for mankind. Amid the vivid and tragic stories of Cain, Abel, and Seth, the Bible includes one short, nearly silent line. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Genesis 5:4. That is all. No names, no ages, no stories, no dreams. Just a single line, as if to remind us that countless other lives once existed, then vanished like mist. Those nameless children, how did they live? How did they love? What hopes, what stumblings, what yearnings shaped the world they helped to build? Is the Bible's silence about them mere omission, or something deeper, more intentional? Some scholars suggest that in the divine wisdom of Scripture, only key figures like Cain, Abel, and Seth are named in order to direct our focus toward the sacred progression of redemptive history. Those pivotal moments that shaped humanity's destiny. But others believe that the silence itself is a kind of hidden trail, a space for the reader to wonder, to seek, to yearn, to understand more deeply their own origins. Ancient texts, like the Book of Jubilees and the Cave of Treasures, suggest that Adam and Eve had many children, perhaps hundreds, even thousands, born over their nearly 1,000-year lifespans. These children spread across the earth, forming the earliest branches of humanity, carrying with them both the light and the shadow of the first family. The silence, therefore, is not simple forgetfulness. It is a haunting void, inviting us to reflect that the lives of ordinary people, those whose names were never recorded, are also an indispensable part of the sacred story of humankind. The grand narrative is not woven solely by great figures, but by countless humble lives sowing quietly in the first fields, so that the world we now know could grow from their seeds. Perhaps even in Scripture's silence, God is reminding us no life, no matter how anonymous, is without worth in His eyes, and in every vein that pulses in us today, there echoes still the quiet song of those nameless children, those first souls who opened the long road of humanity. If ancient sources like the Book of Jubilees, the Cave of Treasures, and early Jewish Christian traditions affirm that Adam and Eve had hundreds or even thousands of children, then one question rises like a shout into the silence. Where did they all go? In the earliest centuries of mankind, there were no borders, no maps, no cities to gather them into civilizations as we now know them. These children, each one setting out in a different direction, spread across the vast unnamed plains. They journeyed eastward to where rivers ran gently beneath a blazing sun. They crossed untrodden plains and forests. They formed the earliest communities, the first tribes, the first homes built with bare hands and hearts, still bearing the memory of Eden. Yet in this dispersion, not all lives were simple. Some carried with them faith, a memory of the creator of laws rooted in love and truth. They pass down to their children ancient stories of a sacred garden of a time when humanity walked beside God, and others in forgetfulness or rebellion lost that memory and built cultures of dark worship, of blood-soaked rituals of kingdoms founded on power and fear. The unnamed children of Adam and Eve, they were the ones who wove together humanity's earliest tapestry. They carried not only blood, but wounds, memories, and the first dreams to every corner of the earth. They planted the original seeds of all that we now call history, legend, religion, and civilization. If we gaze up at the stars, each one shining like a tear from ages past, perhaps somewhere in that vastness still echoes the footsteps of those firstborn souls. And if we listen deeply within our own hearts, we may also hear their silent call, the voices of those who opened the long journey of mankind, carrying both light and shadow, longing and loss, just like us today. This truth that our origins are not only the story of a few well-known names, but the tale of thousands of quiet lives, reminds us that every life, however small, plays a role in the great symphony God began from the dawn of creation. In that early world, where the human population consisted of a single family, the first marriages could not avoid close kinship. It is a heavy truth that the Bible only hints at, but that ancient texts like the Book of Jubilees and Semitic traditions speak of more clearly. The sons and daughters of Adam and Eve had to marry one another, building the world from the closest blood ties. According to the Book of Jubilees, Avan, one of Adam and Eve's earliest daughters, married Cain, her own brother Azura. Another daughter later became the wife of Seth. These unions were not acts of defiance, but unavoidable necessities, essential choices in a world that had just begun from a single family. In ancient Semitic tradition, such sibling marriages in the first generation did not carry the connotation of corruption as we understand today. At that time, before any divine prohibitions had been given, before generations of genetic mutation had accumulated, the human bloodline was still pure, unmarked by the deep scars of sin and time. In that context, marriages between siblings were not only necessary for survival, but a fulfillment of God's first command: be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth. These first children, in marrying one another, bore not only new life, but also a potent memory of Eden and of the one who had formed them. In every child born, one could still hear faint echoes of the garden, the unfulfilled promises, and the deep yearning to return to the one who had been lost. But even within these marriages, shadows crept in. Alongside growth came dispersion. With each new family came new fractures. As humanity multiplied, not just in number, but in pride, greed, and desire, sin too multiplied, spreading into every home, every tribe. From these primal unions, from children who shared the same blood, the world slowly took form, bearing both the flickering light of Eden's memory and the growing darkness of misguided choices. A complex mixture that humanity still carries today. As the number of Adam and Eve's children and grandchildren grew, the early world was no longer a single family gathered around one fire. Life, like rivers branching from a single spring, began to disperse. And from there, the first human lineages were born. The line of Cain, the one who shed his brother's blood, bore a mark that could not be erased. After being cursed and exiled by God, Cain built a city, Enoch, named after his firstborn son. A city rising in the primeval wilderness, built by hands stained with blood, laid on foundations not of justice, but of fear. From Cain came a lineage immersed in technology and the arts, but also in violence, lust and pride. A primitive civilization, glorious on the outside, but hollow in spirit. The line of Seth, the child given as a replacement, walked a different path. They held on to the memory of Eden. They preserved a fragile thread of connection to God through prayer, through sacrifice, and through the sacred remembrance of days when man once walked near him, in the time of Enoch. Adam's grandson through Seth. Scripture records, then men began to call on the name of the Lord. It was the first sign that amid a world growing more chaotic, there were still hearts turned toward the light. But not all of the children of Adam and Eve followed one of the two main paths. Others, nameless children, wandered even farther, venturing beyond the familiar regions. There were tribes that drifted, mingled, and merged with other branches of humanity, living apart from the memory of Eden. They no longer upheld the original faith, yet they did not plunge entirely into the chaos of Cain's lineage. They were true wanderers, souls whose names the world no longer remembers, but whose traces remain imprinted upon the foundations of the most ancient civilizations. This dispersion, originating from a single family, sowed the seeds for every nation, every language, every culture we know today. From a lost Eden, mankind spread across the face of the earth, carrying in their blood both light and shadow, the call of the Creator and the whispers of betrayal. And the world from that moment on was no longer a unified family. It became a ceaseless symphony of contradictions between remembering and forgetting, between faithfulness and rebellion, between the longing to return and the intoxication of escape. Not all the descendants of Adam and Eve chose to remain near one another. In the earliest years of human history, when the land stretched out endlessly and the horizon knew no boundaries, some children departed. Certain ancient traditions preserved within early Jewish and Christian communities tell of nameless children who left their family, left the memory of Eden, and wandered into distant lands, places where the name of the Creator was no longer spoken. In truth, these wayward children strayed not only in geography, but in spirit, in soul. They formed their own communities, their own languages, their own belief systems, vague reflections of a fading memory of God, distorted by time into unfamiliar deities, tales of wrathful gods, monsters and strange heavens. Perhaps they crossed vast grasslands, scaled freezing mountains, and passed through barren deserts where no one had walked before. Perhaps they built primitive civilizations by quiet rivers, towns of rough stone at the base of distant valleys. And perhaps they carried within them the first seeds of division, war, and conquest wounds, no longer between brothers as with Cain and Abel, but between tribes, between peoples. What did they carry with them as they left? A faint memory of Eden, now as dim as a dream after waking. A sliver of knowledge about God, now but a distant echo in forests and empty plains. And with it all, a fierce drive to survive, a longing to build, to conquer, to multiply, even if it meant forgetting their sacred origin. These wayward children, in some way, are still part of us. In every restless step humanity has taken across the continents, in every existential loneliness that won't let go, in every dream of a lost homeland, we hear their distant echoes, those souls who gave up Eden in search of something they perhaps no longer even remembered. And maybe in that unending wandering the story of corruption and the invitation to return still quietly continues, generation after generation. From the line of Cain, darkness began to spread like a growing oil slick, unstoppable. Abel's death was not merely a tragic moment in the history of the first family. It was the opening of a new historical current, a history of violence, depravity, and choices made against the light. Cain, with blood on his hands, was no longer just a farmer. He became a builder, but a builder upon fear. The city of Enoch, named after his firstborn son, rose in the wilderness as a proud declaration that man could create security, could build his own world apart from God. But the foundation of that city was not justice. It was insecurity, not love, but suspicion. From Cain came new generations, people like Lamech, the first man mentioned to have taken 2 wives, marking the first fracture in the sacred design of marriage, which God had established as the unity between one man and one woman. Lamech boasted that he had killed a man and claimed that if Cain would be avenged 7 times, then he would be avenged 77 times. In this lineage, violence was no longer a tragedy. It became a source of pride, an identity. Cain's descendants were also the birthplace of the arts and technology, music, metalwork, animal husbandry, the early signs of civilization. But these achievements were not accompanied by reverence for God. Instead, they deepened mankind's pride in its self-sufficiency. The culture of Cain was one that sought to build a world without God, a world where strength, talent, and ambition became idols, and inevitably, depravity spread across the earth. When man worships only himself, violence becomes the common language. Life loses its sanctity. The strong crush the weak. Death becomes ordinary, even glorified, and the earth, the land once given by God to be tended and guarded, became soaked with blood and cries of injustice. The price of this depravity did not come immediately, but it was accumulating silently and surely, like dark clouds gathering before a terrible storm. And one day, the cries of the earth would grow too loud for the heavens to ignore. Amid the rising flood of darkness from Cain's line, one fragile light still remained. It was the line of Seth, the remnant of hope of God's memory of faithfulness to the original promise. The children of Seth, though fewer and more isolated, held on to what little remained of Eden, the belief that man was not just formed from dust, but breathed into by the Eternal One. They lived apart from the rapidly growing civilizations under Cain's shadow. They worshipped God not in grand temples of stone, but in simple offerings lifted from poor fields and repentant hearts. The book of Jubilees tells us that the sons of Seth lived atop a sacred mountain. Some call it the mountain of worship, where they prayed, sang hymns, and lived in simplicity and righteousness. They were given a promise that if they remained faithful, they would not be destroyed like the corrupt ones in the valleys below. But temptation, subtle as morning mist from the valley, began to creep in. The line of Cain had built not only cities, but also alluring music, gleaming craftsmanship, and seductive pleasures. And from the heights, the sons of Seth looked down, and their hearts began to stir. They saw the daughters of Cain were beautiful. They heard the enchanting songs. They observed the comfort, the freedom, the captivating life Cain's descendants had built. Slowly but surely, some among them descended from the sacred mountain. They intermingled, took wives from among the children of Cain, and began to trade the memory of Eden for the fleeting joys of the world. The fragile light began to flicker. By blending with the line of Cain, the children of Seth lost the sacred separation that God had desired for them. And the world, instead of healing from two distinct paths, sank deeper into chaos. A world where the distinction between the righteous and the corrupt grew ever more blurry. A world where the mingling of light and darkness became the norm. And yet, not all the light was extinguished. There remained a few, a smoldering ember, faithful souls who kept the memory of Eden alive in their hearts. And from them, one day, a chosen man would arise, an ark would be built, a door of hope would open again in the coming great flood. Genesis chapter 6 opens a dark scene when human beings began to increase in number on the earth, and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. A simple sentence, yet beneath it trembles an earthquake, cracking the very foundation of early humanity. Who were the sons of God? Early Jewish Christian tradition explains they were the descendants of Seth, those born in remembrance of the divine promise, those who still carried the flame of faith amid a corrupting world. The daughters of men, they were the line of Cain, those who had drifted far from the light, who built cities and cultures with their hands, but no longer placed God at the center. When the sons of Seth looked down and were drawn to the outward beauty of Cain's daughters, a blending began. They took wives from that line, no longer distinguishing light from darkness. They allowed the voice of the flesh of ambition and of earthly desires to pull them away from the path laid down at the beginning. This blending was more than the mingling of two bloodlines. It was the mingling of sacred memory with dark ambition. It was the exchange of the knowledge of God for comfort, false security, and worldly dreams. As these marriages took place, not just families fractured, but the soul of humanity itself began to break. The children born of these unions grew up in a world where the line between righteousness and evil was no longer clear. They inherited a faint memory of a lost Eden, but also pride, lust, and the thirst for power. And bit by bit, the world sank deeper into chaos. That blending, what began as infatuated glances, rushed marriages, seemingly harmless choices, opened the way for a time when violence, corruption, and rebellion would fill the earth. A time when light and darkness blended so thoroughly that no one could tell them apart. A time when God, looking down upon the earth, would grieve deeply that the hearts of men were filled only with wicked thoughts continually. And from those unions, history moved steadily toward a breaking point, a divine wrath, a great flood, silently gathering, preparing to wash the earth clean of all that had become corrupted to its very roots. When the marriages between the sons of God and the daughters of men took place, a strange and terrifying phenomenon began to emerge on the earth. The Nephilim, beings translated as the fallen ones or giants, are first mentioned in Genesis 6 as those who lived in those days, men who were heroes of old men of renown. The Nephilim were not merely towering in physical stature. They symbolized a deep perversion, a distorted fusion of light and darkness, of divine memory and human ambition. Ancient texts, like the Book of Enoch, suggest that the Nephilim were born not just of mixed human lineages, but from unions between fallen celestial beings, rebellious angels, and humanity, a profound violation of the sacred order God had set in place. Within that context arises a haunting question. Could the earliest descendants of Adam and Eve, the forgotten children, have contributed to the rise of these hybrid creatures? As the wandering children of Adam were drawn into darkness as the memory of holiness faded, did they realize they were opening a door to foreign beings, to realities beyond the boundaries that God had established? The Nephilim in ancient tradition represented not only unmatched strength, but an age in which sin, arrogance, and lust had reached irredeemable proportions. These giants, through their power and brutality, ruled the earth, spreading violence and terror. The world created to be a flourishing garden of life had become a battlefield ruled by soulless giants who no longer feared God. And so the earth groaned, the streams dried up, the plains lay in ruins, the cries of mankind and all creation rose to the heavens, breaking through the heavy silence to reach the one who had made it all. The Nephilim were the clearest sign of just how far humanity had fallen. When the descendants of Adam and Eve, those bearing the image of God, allowed that image to be defaced and corrupted, the consequence could no longer be a gentle warning. It would be an unavoidable reckoning, a total cleansing to preserve what little remained. As darkness thickened over the earth and evil surged like a poisonous tide, the children of Adam and Eve, once breathed into by the Spirit of God, now lived as forgotten beings, lost in lust, violence, and pride. The earth no longer echoed with songs of praise to the Creator, but was filled with shrieks, the clash of swords, and the weeping of the oppressed. Genesis tells us that God looked down and saw that the wickedness of mankind had become great on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. The heart of the Creator pounded with sorrow. He regretted having made humanity not because he had erred, but because the betrayal of love brought him immeasurable grief. It was a betrayal not born of chance, but of generations choosing to turn their backs on the light and sink into a darkness of their own making. Yet even within that mounting wrath, a fragile spark of life was preserved. A flicker of light still burned in the sea of night. Noah, a descendant of Seth, is described in Scripture as a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, a man who walked with God. While the whole world turned away from the Creator, Noah quietly held fast to his faith, walking alone against the rushing current of a lost humanity. God, full of mercy, but also justice, resolved to purify the earth. There was no more room for a world where evil had seeped into every fiber of life. A great flood would come not as blind destruction, but as a painful purification to rescue what still could be saved. Noah was chosen not because he was perfect, but because he believed. He was commanded to build an ark, a sign amid cracked ground, amid the scoffing of the world, amid a generation that had forgotten that even God's tears could become a flood. In quiet obedience, Noah carved plank by plank, beam by beam, while the shadows thickened around him. The ark, a symbol of hope, as the world braced to be swept away. A promise that even in judgment, God would not abandon. A covenant that there would be a new beginning, a new promise for those who still bowed to the sacred call. And while the rains had not yet come, while the skies remained unbroken, Noah continued to shape wood in silence, because he knew the most painful cleansing is not when the waters rise, but when a heart must hold on to faith alone in a world that has forgotten the light. When the swirling clouds cloaked the heavens and the first heavy raindrops fell on parched ground, a tragic chapter of human history began. The Great Flood did not merely wash away houses, fields, and cities. It swept away memory, bloodlines, and the heritage woven since the very beginning. How many descendants of Adam vanished in those boundless waters? No one knows. We only know that besides Noah, his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and their wives, all others on earth were swept away. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of family branches descending from Adam and Eve, from Seth and Cain, from countless unnamed children, all submerged in a flood from which they would never return. Early cultures, small communities that once lit sparks of hope, distorted echoes of Eden, all erased. The songs, the traditions, the stories whispered from parent to child, beneath wild skies, all sank beneath thick mud and forgotten silence. The Great Flood was not just a cleansing of flesh, it was a burial of unwritten history. Every rising drop of water was an indictment of humanity's sin. Every crashing wave, a silent lament for lost chances. If Adam and Eve had ever hoped their children would grow to find the way back to Eden, this flood was the bitter confirmation that mankind from the very beginning had lost its way in pride and desire. And on that endless ocean, only a single ark remained rocking between the waves, carrying the final memory of the beginning. It bore not only physical life, but a thin thread of hope that one day the blood of Adam would be restored, purified, and once again know how to walk with God as in the days of old. But the loss cannot be denied. A significant part of Adam's legacy, the untold stories, the names never recorded, vanished forever into silence. An emptiness stretching from then until now, like a deep fracture in the memory of humanity. The Great Flood swept away the past, and that small ark carrying the remnants of Eden drifted quietly toward a new beginning, yet also bearing the shadow of a history forever broken. When the final waters of the Great Flood receded, and Noah's Ark rested on the slopes of Mount Ararat, a new world emerged, empty, damp, and heavy with unnamed loss. But from that desolation, the last fragments of humanity began to take the first steps into a new chapter. Noah's descendants, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, carried within them the blood of Adam and Eve, but also the dark memories of a history washed away. They were not just survivors. They were heirs of a broken legacy, a sacred memory mingled with sin, an unfinished symphony of light and darkness. From Shem would come the Semitic peoples, those who would preserve the flame of faith, whose bloodline would lead to Abraham, to Israel, and finally to the promise of salvation for all mankind. From Japheth would come the peoples of the north, distant civilizations stretching from the Caspian Sea to the farthest shores of Europe. And from Ham, whose line included Egypt, Canaan, and Cush, would arise great kingdoms, but also deep, unhealed wounds. Every nation that emerged from the flood carried a piece of that first story, a fragment of Eden's memory, a shadow of Cain's sin, a glimmer of Seth's light. None were wholly innocent. None were beyond hope. And human history since then has been a long epic of striving to find the way back to lost Eden, striving to mend torn memories, striving to hear again the faint voice of the one who once walked with man in the garden. The surviving descendants. Those who lived through the flood did not begin anew with clean slates. They bore the imprints of their ancestors in body and soul. And so the story of humanity has never been simply one of progress. It is the story of stumbling and rising again, the story of civilizations built and destroyed, the story of cities like Babel, whose towers dared reach the heavens only to fall through pride that never died. That story, the story of the descendants of Adam and Eve, has never been fully told, because it is still being written day by day, in every breath, in every step we take today. We who carry the blood of the first children are still living in the next chapter of that story, still searching for the way home. When the last drops of the great flood fell away, when history began to flow again from the survivors, a quiet, persistent question echoed across the centuries. Who are we? Where did we come from? And today, in the light of modern science, that ancient answer seems to shimmer in an unexpected way. Studies of mitochondrial DNA. The form of DNA passed from mother to child have revealed that all of humanity, regardless of race, language, or geography, can be traced back to a common origin, a primal mother, an ancient bloodline that once pulsed through the very first lifelines of mankind. Scientists call her mitochondrial Eve. Not Eve in the purely theological sense, but a lingering biological imprint from the dawn of time. But could it be that at a deeper level, this is more than just a story of genetics? Could it be that woven within those genetic codes, there also remains a faint memory of a lost Garden of Eden of evenings, when Adam and Eve walked with God, of promises left unfinished, and of sobs in the dark after the gates of paradise closed? Across the world, from African tribes and ancient Middle Eastern civilizations to the myths of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, stories of a great flood, of first ancestors of a golden age lost long ago, echo like shattered mirror pieces reflecting a buried truth. Every culture, despite thousands of miles and thousands of years of separation, holds deep within itself a longing for the beginning. We, though living in modern cities and walking on streets aglow with artificial light, still carry within us an undeniable inheritance. A red thread connects us to the nameless children of Adam and Eve across the great flood, through vanished empires and dynasties, through generations of mingled bloodlines. Could it be that we are not merely living in the aftermath of that story, but are its continuation? Could it be that in the beating of every human heart, we are echoing the quiet call of distant Eden, yearning for the place we lost, longing for a redemption that the blood of our ancestors has whispered about since the first days? The remaining mysteries do not lie only in ancient scrolls or in fragments of old DNA. They lie within us, in eyes searching for meaning, in hearts that still ache at the brokenness of the world, in souls that still stir with longing for a home we have never truly forgotten. If every nation on earth can be traced back to the same source, if we are truly descendants of the first children, then what happened? Why, among brothers of the same blood, has humanity become filled with war, hatred, and division? Perhaps the first fractures did not begin with borders or politics, but with hearts broken from the very beginning. From the moment Cain stood in the field and looked upon the lifeless body of Abel, darkness crept into the fabric of human relationship. A wound was opened, not just between two brothers, but at the very foundation of the human family. Every betrayal, every rage, every act of greed or hatred since then is but a distant echo of that first blood-soaked afternoon. As the descendants of Adam and Eve spread across the earth, they carried not only life, but fragments, conflicts never fully healed. They carried a dim memory of a loss that was never restored, and deep within every people, every civilization has struggled to reclaim what their ancestors lost: acceptance, protection, a sense of belonging. The first wars over land, over power, over glory, were not merely historical events. They were the dark offspring of a family that forgot it was once one. The divisions over skin color, language, and belief, perhaps deep down, are distorted echoes of a lost Eden where all were meant to live in perfect unity with God and with one another. And today, when we see walls erected between nations, when we see blood spilled in endless conflict, what are we truly witnessing? Is it merely the natural outcome of history, or a painful reminder that the first wound has never healed? That this separation is not accidental, but a part of our inheritance from those first days when mankind walked away from Eden with fractured hearts and in the depths of our souls. Could it be that we are waiting even unknowingly for a call to return, a reconciliation, not just between person and person, but between us and the one who made us, between us and the primal memory of a family without war, without division, without hate? Because until that wound is healed, history will repeat itself like a distant echo of the first children lost in a world they themselves had shattered. So pause for just a moment amid the rush of the modern world. Place your hand on your chest and feel the rhythm of your heart. In every beat, in every silent flow of blood, what do we carry? We carry the memory of Eden, faint but never erased. We carry the first cry of Abel, the exile of Cain, the fragile light of Seth, and the shadow of the days before the flood. The blood of Adam and Eve, of the first children of the forgotten ones, still courses through the veins of all humanity today. We have inherited not only brokenness and failure, we have also inherited a promise spoken at the fading edge of Eden, that one day the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head, that light would overcome darkness, that the memory of home would be restored not just in remembrance, but in new life. The human journey is not only a tale of fallenness, it is also the story of an unending search. Every longing for justice, every cry for true love, every sorrow at the sight of a broken world, all are distant echoes from our original beginning, from an Eden lost but never entirely forgotten. And today, amid division, loss, war and deep loneliness, that call still resounds, a voice calling us to remember, not just to grieve the past, but to realize that we are still being invited into the future, a future not built on forgetting, but on reconciliation, not built on fear, but on promise. Remember your origin, not merely as a tragedy, but as a beginning that has never fully closed, a story still unfolding, waiting for us to walk forward with faith, with humility, and with hearts still longing to return to the place we lost to home, because that blood, the blood of Adam and Eve, of hope, of sorrow, and of promise, is still alive in every breath we take today. Amen.